Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the Terra's Pride and watched the screens in front of her. The ship was not big compared to the massive vessels that had just appeared in their space. She counted 30 large ships and many smaller ones. They had come out of nowhere, and now blocked the path back to Earth. Amy Brooks walked up beside her captain. She was the second in command and had been with Lisa for 3 years. Amy looked worried as she studied the alien fleet. The ships were beautiful, but dangerous looking. Some had long curved lines that reminded her of old sailing ships. Others looked like they were made of crystal and metal mixed together. Lisa took a deep breath and stayed calm. She had seen many strange things in space, but this was different. These ships belonged to 2 different groups working together. That was unusual. Most alien species kept to themselves or fought each other. Working together meant something big was happening. The communication system made a soft sound. Someone wanted to talk. Lisa nodded to Amy, who opened the channel. The main screen changed to show 2 figures standing side by side. One was tall and had pointed ears. Her skin was pale and her hair was long and silver. She wore armor that seemed to glow with its own light. The other figure had 4 arms and skin that looked like purple crystal. Her eyes were bright yellow, and she stood very straight. The elf spoke first. Her voice was proud and cold. She said her name was Admiral Serafina Moonwhisper of the Etherian Elven Empire. She pointed to her companion and said, this was General Vexathera of the Zephyrian Collective. Lisa had heard of both groups. The elves thought they were better than everyone else. The aliens liked to take things from other species by force. Serafina continued talking. She said the human species had been watched for some time. The Empire and the Collective had decided that humans were becoming a problem. They expanded too fast and made friends with too many other species. This made the galaxy unstable. Therefore, humans must be stopped. General Vexathera stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice sounded like rocks grinding together. She said humans would no longer be allowed to leave their home system. All human ships outside of Earth space must return immediately. Any human colonies on other worlds must be abandoned. The Empire and Collective would provide protection for humanity, but only if they stayed in their small corner of space. Lisa listened to everything they said. She did not get angry or scared. She just nodded and thought about what she heard. Amy was making notes on her tablet. The bridge crew stayed quiet and did their jobs. This was not the first time someone had tried to tell humans what to do. When the 2 aliens finished talking, Lisa stepped forward. She introduced herself and her ship. She thanked them for taking the time to contact Earth. She said she understood their concerns about human expansion. She also said she would be happy to discuss these matters in person if they wanted. This seemed to surprise both aliens. They had expected fear or anger, or maybe attempts to fight. Instead, the human captain was being polite and offering to meet face to face. Serafina looked confused. General Vexathera clicked her crystal fingers together, which was probably a sign of annoyance. Lisa continued in her calm voice. She said the Terra's Pride was not a military ship. It was an exploration vessel studying the gas clouds near Jupiter. However, it did have a good meeting room, and she could provide food and drinks for their discussion. She thought it would be better to talk in person rather than over communication screens. Admiral Serafina whispered something to General Vexathera. They seemed to be arguing about something. Finally, Serafina turned back to the screen. She said they would consider this meeting. But Lisa should understand that this was not a negotiation. The Empire and Collective had made their decision about humanity. This meeting would simply be to explain exactly what humans must do. Lisa smiled and said she understood. She gave them coordinates for a neutral location near Jupiter's 4th moon. She said they could meet in 2 hours if that worked for them. She also mentioned that her cook made excellent coffee, and she had some Earth foods they might find interesting. General Vexathera made a sound that might have been laughter or anger. It was hard to tell with her species. She said humans were strange creatures. Most species either attacked immediately or begged for mercy when facing such overwhelming force. Humans offered coffee and snacks. Amy stepped closer to Lisa and whispered that this might be a trap. The alien ships could easily destroy the Terra's Pride. Lisa nodded but said they had to try talking first. Fighting would only prove the aliens were right about humans being dangerous. Besides, she was curious about what these two groups really wanted. The communication ended, and the screen went dark. Lisa looked around at her crew. Everyone was watching her and waiting for orders. She told them to prepare the main conference, room for guests. She wanted everything clean and comfortable. She also told Amy to contact Earth and send a full report about what had happened. The Terra's Pride began moving toward the meeting coordinates. Behind them, the massive alien fleet followed at a distance. Lisa stood at her window and watched Jupiter grow larger as they approached. She wondered what the aliens really knew about humanity. They were about to find out that humans were not what they expected. 2 hours later, 3 small ships separated from the alien fleet and headed toward the Terra's Pride. The meeting was about to begin. Lisa straightened her uniform and walked toward the conference room. She hoped this would end peacefully, but she was ready for anything that might happen. The docking bay of the Terra's Pride had never held such unusual guests. Admiral Serafina Moonwhisper stepped through the airlock wearing armor that seemed to be made of moonlight and silver. Her long ears twitched as she looked around the simple, human ship. Behind her came 2 elf guards carrying weapons that glowed with magical energy. They moved like dancers, but their eyes were cold and ready for trouble. General Vexthara followed with her own guards. The Zephyrian leader was taller than the elves, and her 4 arms moved in patterns that seemed threatening. Her crystal skin caught the light from the ship's normal bulbs and threw rainbow colors on the walls. The guards behind her carried weapons that looked like they could cut through metal easily. Lisa Morgan waited for them with a smile. She wore her regular uniform with no weapons or armor. Next to her stood Amy Brooks and Chief Petty Officer Rachel Kim. Rachel was carrying a tray with 3 different types of coffee and some small earth pastries. The smell filled the docking bay and made the alien guards look confused. Serafina spoke first. Her voice echoed in the small space and sounded much more impressive than it had on the communication screen. She said she was honored to be aboard a human vessel, even though it was clearly built by a primitive species. She looked around at the simple metal walls and basic lighting. Everything looked rough compared to elven ships that were grown from living crystal and powered by starlight. General, Vexthara made a sound deep in her throat. She said human ships smelled strange. Too much organic matter and not enough pure mineral scents. Her species preferred environments that were more like the inside of caves filled with precious stones. The Terra's Pride smelled too much like the living world where humans came from. Lisa nodded and said she understood their ships were probably much more advanced. She led them toward the conference room and talked about how humans built things to be practical rather than beautiful. She said beauty was nice, but in space, it was more important that everything worked when you needed it to work. The conference room was simple but clean. It had a large table made of earthwood and comfortable chairs. The walls showed pictures of Earth and some of the places humans had explored. There were also small plants growing in containers near the windows. The whole room felt warm and alive. Rachel set down her tray and poured coffee for everyone. She explained the different types and asked what each guest might prefer. Serafina looked suspicious of the dark liquid, but General Vexthara seemed curious. She used one of her 4 hands to pick up a cup and smell it carefully. Lisa sat down and invited her guests to do the same. She said she wanted to understand exactly what the Empire and Collective were asking of humanity. She had brought some information about human space exploration that might help explain why stopping expansion would be difficult. Serafina remained standing. She said there was nothing to discuss. Humans had grown too fast and made too many alliances with other species. This disrupted the careful balance that had existed in the galaxy for thousands of years. The Empire had maintained peace by keeping different species in their proper places. Humans ignored these boundaries and caused chaos wherever they went. General Vexthara finally sat down and tasted the coffee. Her yellow eyes widened with surprise, and she made a pleased sound. She said the drink was better than expected, but this did not change the facts. The Collective had observed human expansion for 50 years. Humans took resources that rightfully belonged to stronger species. They also protected weaker species that should have been conquered long ago. Lisa listened carefully and took notes. She asked questions about which specific human actions had caused problems. She wanted to understand if there had been misunderstandings that could be fixed. She also asked about the alliance between the Empire and Collective, since the two groups had never worked together before. This question seemed to make both aliens uncomfortable. Serafina said the Empire did not normally work with lesser species, but the human problem was too large for any one group to handle alone. General Vexathara clicked her crystal fingers and said the Collective preferred to work alone, but humans had interfered with too many of their operations. Amy Brooks spoke up for the first time. She asked if either group had tried to contact Earth directly before now. She said the human government had departments that handled relations with other species. Maybe there had been problems because no one had talked to the right people. Serafina laughed, but it was not a happy sound. She said primitive species did not get to negotiate with the Empire. The Empire decided what was best for everyone and expected obedience. That was how peace had been maintained for so long. Humans needed to learn their place like every other young species. General Vexathara added that the Collective had tried to harvest resources from worlds that humans claimed to protect. Human ships had interfered and prevented proper resource collection. This could not be allowed to continue. Strong species had the right to take what they needed from weak species. Lisa nodded and said she was beginning to understand the problem. She asked Rachel to bring some Earth food for their guests to try. She also asked Amy to set up the holographic projector. She said she had some information that might help explain the human point of view. The hologram showed a map of known space. Blue dots marked human colonies and stations. Green dots showed species that had agreements with humanity. Red dots marked Empire territory, and yellow dots showed collective space. The pattern was interesting and not what the aliens had expected to see. Serafina stared at the map. There were far more blue and green dots than she had realized. Human space was not small and contained in one corner as she had thought. It spread across many systems and connected different regions of the galaxy. The Empire territory looked smaller in comparison. General Vexathara counted the dots and made calculations in her head. The numbers did not match what collective intelligence had reported. Either the humans were lying or collective scouts had missed most of the human expansion. Both possibilities were disturbing for different reasons. Lisa stood up and pointed to different areas of the map. She explained that humans had been exploring space for over 100 years. They had made contact with many species and built relationships based on trade and mutual help. She said humans believed cooperation worked better than conquest for everyone involved. The aliens looked at each other. Something was very wrong with their information about humanity. The species they had planned to contain and control was already larger and more connected than either of their empires. This meeting was not going the way they had expected it to go. Dr. Helen Martinez entered the conference room carrying a tablet full of information. She was the Terra's Pride's chief science officer and had spent years studying different alien species. Lisa had called her to explain some things about human expansion that the Empire and Collective did not seem to understand. Serafina looked annoyed when another human joined the meeting. She had expected this to be a simple matter of giving orders and watching humans accept them. Instead, more humans kept arriving with more information. General Vexathara seemed more interested in the tablet Helen carried. Technology always caught the attention of collective members. Helen sat down and smiled at their guests. She said she had heard they were concerned about human expansion affecting other species. She wanted to share some examples of how humans actually worked with alien civilizations. She thought this might clear up some misunderstandings about human intentions. Lisa asked Helen to start with the lithoid situation in the Kepler system. Helen nodded and activated her tablet. The hologram now showed a rocky planet with strange crystal formations growing everywhere. She explained that humans had discovered this world 5 years ago and found it was inhabited by silicon-based life forms. The lithoids were peaceful, but had been under attack by raiders who wanted to harvest their crystal bodies for valuable minerals. The raiders were not from any major empire, but they had better weapons than the native species could handle. The lithoids had asked several groups for help, but no one was interested in protecting a species that could not pay for protection. Helen continued the story. When human explorers arrived, they saw what was happening and offered to help. They did not ask for payment or demand territory in return. They simply thought it was wrong for the raiders to attack peaceful people. Human engineers worked with lithoid builders to create defense systems that could protect their cities. General Vexithara interrupted. She said this proved humans were interfering with natural selection. Strong species should be allowed to take resources from weak species. This was how the galaxy had always worked. By protecting the weak, humans were making the galaxy soft and preventing proper evolution. Dr. Susan Walsh entered the room at that moment. She was the ship's specialist in alien biology and had been studying the reports Helen was sharing. Susan said she had different information about how the galaxy actually worked. She had data from 40 different worlds that told a very different story. Serafina was getting more frustrated. She said the Empire did not need lessons from primitive humans about galactic politics. The elves had been managing interstellar relations for thousands of years before humans even discovered fire. Whatever information these humans had was probably wrong or misunderstood. Susan calmly activated another display. This one showed population data from different star systems over the past 500 years. The numbers told a clear story. Regions where stronger species conquered weaker ones became less populated and less productive over time. Areas where species cooperated and traded became more populated and produced more resources. The data surprised both aliens. Serafina had always been taught that the Empire's way of keeping species separate and controlled created stability. But the numbers showed that imperial regions were actually losing population while human-influenced areas were growing. This did not match what she had learned in the Imperial Academy. General Vexithara studied the biological data more carefully. Her species valued accurate information about resource production and population management. The human data was detailed and well organized. It showed that cooperative civilizations developed new technologies faster and used resources more efficiently than conquest-based societies. Amy Brooks had been quietly taking notes during all these presentations. She spoke up and said the humans had one more thing to share. She asked Lisa if they should show their guests the real scope of human defensive capabilities. Lisa thought about this carefully before nodding. Amy activated the main display system. The room filled with a three-dimensional map of local space. This map was much more detailed than the first one they had shown. It included not just human colonies, but also the defense stations that protected them. The network was vast and connected in ways that made it very difficult to attack. Lisa pointed to different parts of the display. She explained that humans built their defenses around protection rather than conquest. Every human colony had the ability to defend itself and help defend neighboring systems. The network grew stronger as more species joined it, rather than weaker. She also mentioned that human colonies were designed to be self-sufficient. They could produce their own food, energy, and manufactured goods. This meant that attacking one colony would not cripple the others. Each settlement could continue operating even if cut off from the rest of human space. Serafina realized that the Empire's plan to contain humanity was already impossible. Humans had spread too far and built too many connections with other species. Trying to force them back to Earth would require a war against dozens of different civilizations. Even the combined Empire and collective fleets would not be large enough for such a conflict. General Vexithara was doing calculations in her head. The resource cost of fighting humans and their allies would be enormous. The collective would have to strip resources from many worlds just to build enough ships for the war. Even if they won, the conquest would cost more than they could ever hope to gain from it. Dr. Martinez showed them one more piece of information. She displayed a list of technologies that humans had developed through cooperation with other species. Lithoid crystal growing techniques had improved human manufacturing. Energy being communication methods had revolutionized human long-distance messaging. Cooperation produced benefits that conquest could never achieve. Lisa stood up and refilled everyone's coffee cups. She said she hoped this information helped explain why humans could not simply stop expanding and return to Earth. Too many other species depended on human protection and trade. Breaking those agreements would harm millions of innocent people across dozens of worlds. She also pointed out that human expansion was not really expansion in the traditional sense. Humans were not conquering territory or demanding tribute from other species. They were building relationships and creating networks that benefited everyone involved. This was why so many species chose to work with humans rather than fight them. The room became quiet as both alien leaders thought about what they had learned. Their bold plan to control humanity was based on completely wrong information about human capabilities and intentions. They had come expecting to deal with a primitive, aggressive species. Instead, they found a sophisticated civilization that had quietly become one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Lieutenant Commander Beth Taylor walked into the conference room carrying a datapad that contained information no one had asked for, but everyone needed to hear. She was the Terra's Pride navigation officer and had been analyzing the real scope of human presence in local space. What she had discovered would change how everyone thought about this meeting. Beth approached the table where the two alien leaders sat looking more uncomfortable than when they had arrived. She asked Lisa for permission to share some recent survey data. Lisa nodded and told her to show everyone what she had found. The information might be surprising, but it was important for their guests to understand the complete situation. The holographic display activated again, but this time it showed a much larger area of space. Beth had expanded the map to include everything, within 200 light-years of Earth. The pattern of blue dots representing human colonies was even more impressive at this scale. They formed a network that connected most of the major star systems in the region. Serafina leaned forward to study the display more carefully. The Empire controlled several important systems, but they were isolated from each other by vast areas of human-influenced space. Imperial trade routes that had operated for centuries now passed through territory where humans had established friendly relationships with local species. General Vex Thara made a sound of distress as she realized what this meant for collective operations. Many of the worlds they had planned to harvest for resources were now under human protection. The careful plans her strategists had made were worthless because they were based on outdated information about human expansion. Beth continued her presentation by showing population growth rates in different regions. Human allied space was growing at twice the rate of either the Empire or the Collective. New colonies were being established every few months, and existing settlements were expanding rapidly. Most importantly, the growth was sustainable and did not depend on conquest or resource extraction from other species. Communications Officer Nina Chen entered the room and whispered something to Lisa. Lisa nodded and asked Nina to share her information with the group. Nina activated another display that showed communication traffic patterns across local space. The amount of data flowing between human colonies and their allies was staggering. Nina explained that humans had developed a communication network that connected hundreds of different species. The network carried trade information, scientific, data, and cultural exchanges between worlds that had never been able to talk to each other before. Many species were learning about technologies and ideas from civilizations they had never known existed. This communication network had another important function. It served as an early warning system for any aggressive actions in the region. When raiders attacked peaceful worlds or empires tried to force unwilling species into submission, the information spread quickly through the network. Response fleets could be organized and deployed before the attackers knew they had been detected. Serafina asked how humans had built such an extensive network without the Empire noticing. Nina explained that humans did not announce their activities or demand recognition for their achievements. They simply helped other species solve problems and build better lives. Word spread naturally as more groups experienced the benefits of working with humans. General Vex Thara was studying the data about resource flows through human space. The numbers showed that cooperative trading networks moved more goods more efficiently than conquest-based systems. Species that worked together developed new technologies and improved their production capabilities. The total wealth in human allied space was growing faster than anyone had realized. Amy Brooks had been quietly monitoring communications from the alien fleets waiting outside. She reported that some of the Empire and Collective ships were receiving new orders from their home governments. The political situation was changing as news of this meeting reached the major population centers of both civilizations. Lisa asked, what kind of new orders were being sent? Amy said it was difficult to decode all the messages, but it seemed like both governments were having emergency meetings about their human policy. Some factions wanted to continue with the original plan, while others were calling for a complete reconsideration of the situation. Dr. Walsh returned to the room with additional information about species that had recently joined the Human Alliance network. She had reports from 12 different civilizations that had signed cooperation agreements with human colonies in just the past 6 months. The expansion was accelerating as more species learned about the benefits of working with humans. Beth Taylor activated a new display that showed military capabilities across the region. This information was sensitive, but Lisa had decided their guests needed to understand the complete picture. The data showed that human allied space could field more defensive ships than either the Empire or Collective could deploy for offensive operations. More importantly, the human defensive network was designed to be redundant and flexible. Destroying any single colony or fleet would not significantly weaken the overall system. The network could adapt and continue functioning even under sustained attack. This made traditional conquest strategies ineffective against human allied territories. Serafina finally spoke after studying all the information she had been shown. She said the Empire had made a serious error in judgment about human capabilities and intentions. The elves had assumed humans were a young, aggressive species that could be controlled through superior force. Instead, they had discovered a mature civilization that had grown beyond the need for such crude methods. General Vexthara was forced to agree. The Collective had planned to harvest resources from human space and reduce human influence in the galaxy. But the humans controlled or influenced so much territory that attacking them would require fighting most of the known civilizations in local space. Even if the Collective could win such a war, the cost would destroy their own civilization in the process. Lisa refilled the coffee cups again and offered her guests some earth pastries that Rachel had brought earlier. She said she understood this was a lot of information to process. The human network had grown gradually over many decades, and even humans were sometimes surprised by how extensive it had become. She explained that this growth was not planned by any central government or military organization. It happened naturally as humans met other species and found ways to help each other solve problems. Each new relationship led to more connections and opportunities for cooperation. The network grew because it worked better than older methods of organizing galactic society. Nina Chen reported that more messages were coming from the Empire and Collective home worlds. Both governments were requesting detailed reports about everything that had been discussed in this meeting. Political leaders who had supported aggressive action against humans were now facing serious questions about their policies. The two alien leaders looked at each other with expressions that showed they understood their situation had completely changed. They had come to dictate terms to a primitive species and instead discovered they were dealing with a civilization more advanced and powerful than their own. Their bold move had met something they were not prepared to handle. Lisa Morgan stood at the head of the conference table and looked at her two guests who had become much quieter during the past few hours. Admiral Serafina Moonwhisper sat staring at the holographic displays that still showed the true scope of human influence across local space. General Vexthara was using all four of her hands to take notes on a crystal tablet while making calculations about what this information meant for her people. The time had come for Lisa to make humanity's response to the Empire's demands. She had listened carefully to everything the aliens had said about containing human expansion and forcing colonies to return to Earth. Now, she needed to explain why those demands were impossible to fulfill and offer an alternative that might work for everyone. Lisa sat down and spoke in the same calm voice she had used throughout the meeting. She said she appreciated the concerns that both the Empire and Collective had raised about galactic stability. Change could be frightening, especially when it happened quickly, but trying to stop human expansion would cause far more problems than it would solve. She explained that humans were not expanding for conquest or glory. They were exploring space because they were curious about what was out there and wanted to meet new species. When they found people who needed help, they offered assistance. When they discovered species with interesting technologies or cultures, they proposed trade agreements. This was simply how humans approached the universe. Amy Brooks activated a new display that showed what would happen if humans tried to abandon their colonies and return to Earth. Hundreds of species that depended on human protection would be left defenseless against raiders and aggressive empires. Trade networks that supplied food and medicine to remote worlds would collapse. Millions of people would suffer or die from the chaos that would follow. Serafina looked uncomfortable as she studied this projection. The Empire had always claimed to protect weaker species, but they did so by keeping everyone separated and controlled. The human method of creating cooperative networks was different, but the results seemed to be better for the species involved. Forcing humans to abandon their responsibilities would harm exactly the people the Empire claimed to protect. General Vexithara was more focused on the economic implications. The collective depended on taking resources from conquered worlds to maintain their civilization. But the data showed that cooperative trading networks produced more total wealth than conquest-based systems. If the collective could join these networks instead of fighting them, they might actually improve their resource situation. Lisa continued by explaining what humans were willing to offer to both the Empire and the collective. The growing alliance. Network was always open to new members who were willing to follow certain basic principles. They had to respect the independence of other species, stop using conquest as a method of expansion, and contribute to the common defense against truly aggressive threats. She acknowledged that these changes would be difficult for civilizations that had operated differently for thousands of years. But humans were patient and willing to help with the transition process. Species that joined the Alliance network gained access to new technologies, better trade opportunities, and protection from threats they could not handle alone. Dr. Martinez returned to the room with reports from several Empire and collective worlds that had already begun informal cooperation with human colonies. These relationships had developed naturally as local leaders saw the benefits of working with humans. The official policies of both governments had not caught up with what was actually happening at the frontier. Nina Chen added that communication intercepts showed growing political divisions within both the Empire and collective. Younger leaders and frontier governors were questioning the wisdom of confronting humanity. They could see that human-allied regions were more prosperous and peaceful than territories controlled by traditional methods. Serafina finally spoke and admitted that the Empire's information about humans had been seriously incomplete. Imperial intelligence services had focused on human military capabilities and missed the more important story about human diplomatic and economic activities. The Empire had prepared for war against a dangerous enemy and instead found a potential partner that was stronger than they had realized. She asked what guarantees humans could offer that joining their alliance would not result in the Empire losing its independence and cultural identity. This was a real concern for elves who took great pride in their ancient traditions and sophisticated society. They did not want to be absorbed into some human-dominated confederation. Lisa assured her that the Alliance network was specifically designed to preserve the independence and diversity of member species. Humans did not want to rule other civilizations or force them to adopt human customs. The strength of the network came from having many different species contributing their unique capabilities and perspectives to common problems. General Vexithara asked about the practical details of joining such a network. The collective had built their entire society around resource extraction and military conquest. Changing to a cooperation-based system would require massive social and economic reforms. She wanted to know if humans would provide assistance during this transition period. Amy Brooks responded that humans had helped several other species make similar transitions. The process was challenging but not impossible. It usually took 10 to 20 years for a civilization to fully adapt to cooperative methods. During this time, alliance partners provided technical assistance, economic support, and protection from enemies who might try to take advantage of the transition period. Beth Taylor showed a projection of what local space might look like in 50 years if current trends continued. The Cooperative Alliance network would include most species in the region. Trade and communication would flow freely between worlds. Conflicts would be resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. The total population and wealth of the region would be much higher than it was today. Lisa stood up and made her final offer. Both the Empire and Collective were welcome to join the growing network of species that had chosen cooperation over conquest. They could begin with limited partnerships in specific regions and gradually expand their involvement as they became comfortable with new methods. Humans would provide whatever assistance was needed to make the transition successful. However, she also made it clear that human expansion and the growth of the Alliance network would continue regardless of what the Empire and Collective decided. Too many species had already committed to this path for it to be stopped now. The only real choice was whether to join the new system or be left behind by it. Serafina and General Vexithara looked at each other with expressions that showed they understood the magnitude of the decision they faced. They had come here expecting to dictate terms to a primitive species. Instead, they had discovered a civilization that had already moved beyond their understanding of how galactic society should work. The meeting ended with both alien leaders requesting time to consult with their governments about this unexpected situation. They returned to their ships carrying information that would force both the Empire and Collective to completely reconsider their policies toward humanity and other species in the region. Lisa watched their ships depart and then returned to her regular duties. The Terra's Pride still had a mission to complete studying the gas clouds near Jupiter. Tomorrow there would be more routine work cataloging stellar phenomena and updating navigation charts. The galaxy was a big place with room for everyone who was willing to share it peacefully.